The B-side. The B-side. Oh, the B-side. The B-side. Yeah.
Hey everybody, this is Nine with the B-side. I am so stoked to bring you a full-length interview with Ali McMordie from the seminal punk band Stiff Little Fingers. We talked to him via Skype all the way from London. It's a long interview, it's almost an hour, really kind of a documentary. We have got a lot of graphics and a lot of live shows that we show in it, and Ali pretty much tells us everything from the beginnings of the band all the way through the conflicts in Ireland, moving to London, and all the excitement that followed their first 4 albums, the breakup of the band, him returning back in 2006, and their new album 2014, and behind the scenes stuff about the record business. It's a great interview. I hope you enjoy it. Also keep an eye out, we're going to be doing a GoFundMe because the B-side would like to expand a little bit and upgrade some of our equipment that's sort of getting old and dying, and we'd like to bring you more of the content you guys have been saying you love, so keep an eye out for that. And now here's the interview with Ali McMordie of Stiff Little Fingers. Peace. Ali McMordie, welcome to the B-side. Thanks for joining us.
You're very welcome. It's a pleasure to talk to you guys. I love the site.
Oh, thank you very much.
And the spirit of what you're doing.
First of all, congratulations on all the recent successes. It seems like you guys are really surging right now.
Yeah, I never would have thought that, my God, 40 years ago that this punk rock novelty would have lasted so many decades. You know, we were just kind of amazed that it lasted more than a couple of years at the time. But it's a funny thing, though, looking back at those years, which was at a very formative age. You know, we were barely out of high school. I think I was like 19 whenever the band started, and I remember back then with all the turmoil that was going on, not just in our environment in Northern Ireland, but also within the band. You know, we're all sort of pulling in different directions, and we're all kind of hot-headed. And looking back at those short few years and very productive years from 77 through till 81, 82, it seemed, you know, in terms of time, it seemed more like 10, 15, maybe even 20 years compared to how we see things now. But I guess that just happens with the transition of age and things that we learn. What is it they say? Youth is wasted on the young. has been eternally said. But you know, we've gone through quite a lot of lineup changes and locations as well. We're sort of spread all over the place these days, but still managed to get it together to tour and very occasionally write. But there aren't so many fisticuffs within the band these days. You know, we're too long in the tooth for that. I think nowadays we would just see it in terms of hospital bills instead of proving a point.
That's why young men fight the wars, right?
Yeah, sorry, what was that?
I said that's why young men fight the wars. The old men you're not up for it anymore.
That's right. The generals sit at the back.
So, can you talk to me a little bit about engineering and the sound that you get? I noticed, especially on the last album, where you had such a robust sound. It was very much like I was standing like in the middle of the floor at a show next to the mixing board. It sounded very live without sounding with the crowd taken out of it, but it sounded very live, not very studio and plastic. And is that something that you all were trying to achieve, or is that just a happy coincidence?
Yes, it was. I'm glad that you said that. It was very much what we were trying to achieve. To a certain extent, you're talking to the wrong guy because I would give the credibility for that and the credit to our engineer, Jason. Was it Jason Donaghy? And you are talking about the studio album.
Yeah.
That a couple of years ago. Well, the approach that we had was it was a digital recording
Right.
using Pro Tools, just because of the flexibility that that gave us, and of course you can work so much more quickly with Pro Tools than with tape. And whenever you're on a budget, you have to take these things into consideration. But to get a good drum sound, because I mean, to my mind, even though I'm the bass player, I think the drums are the most important thing on a record. And to get the right sound, we recorded the drums on an analog desk with with tape on that, and then flew guitars and vocals in on top of that. You see, we're not the best musicians in the world, and very often, whenever you're trying to get it right, that can detract from the performance almost, if you like, to try and capture that liveliness. So what we did was we recorded everything live, and then went back in and overdubbed bass and guitars and vocals, which took a little bit of the pressure off making sure we didn't fuck it up. But because the drums were analog, it kept that warm, direct, and an immediate kind of sound. And I think that was the basis of it. I mean, I was a bit worried that it was a bit too tame. I thought the guitars could have been louder, and I was worried that maybe it had lost a little bit of that live edge, because the band is popular live, and what's kept us going is just the excitement, the sheer excitement and energy that comes across from the audience, who are very fanatical. They've been with us for years. We see the same faces popping up again and again, and I'm saying to you guys, aren't you fed up with us by now? And it's very reassuring.
It's here where Ali and I lost connection via Skype, but we were able to reconnect after a couple of technical issues were ironed out. But I also wanted to show you an example of how great the band is live. So this is a taping from the Isle of Wight Festival in 2015. The song is Alternative Ulster. question was, talk to me, or the statement really was to talk to me a little bit about the resurgence of punk, not only in terms of interest from the fans of hearing it, but also the philosophy of punk and sort of how we've come full circle with the things that were happening in the 70s and 80s sort of rearing their heads again, i.e. the rise of the strongmen again around the world, and a general unrest.
Yeah, I mean, it's whenever we look at the atmosphere in the political and social and economic conditions that prevailed in Britain and Ireland, and I can only really use my own personal experience of that part of the world. Whenever punk came along, that to a large extent generated that movement. It wasn't just, I would say, a dissatisfaction with the status quo of the music that was at the time, that prevailed at the time, because it was pretty boring and complacent, I would say, and that was at a stage that needed a bit of a kick up the ass. But also we had in London, I remember there were garbage strikes on, garbage piled high everywhere. There were cutbacks. There were at one point in the mid-70s, there was a 3-day working week imposed. Drastic economic conditions to try and curtail the recession that was happening at the time. I can't remember if it was recession or inflation, but there were pretty drastic measures that were there, and the atmosphere was very much of economic despair. But also, as well as that, there was the far right, the National Front over in Britain and Ireland was, and I guess many of the European countries as well, was a lot stronger than it is even than it is now, and that needed to be we needed to combat that as well. and to that extent, yes, that might have something to do with the fact that the music as a political force has continued and is as popular now as it was then, if not as obviously groundbreaking. But yeah, we're seeing the rise of the right again, and the normalization of the right, and it's the language is a very dangerous thing. Whenever the white supremacists are called the new right or whatever, the whatever phrase, whatever media friendly phrase that they have for it. I was just reading about the Balkans conflict, and the phrase that they had for mass genocide was ethnic cleansing, and it was a disgusting way to describe whole families being murdered and people uprooted from their homes and centuries of tradition discarded. And without getting too far into the political extremes, also, of course, as a musical force, we've managed to weather all the different genres that have come along since then. I can remember when New Romanticism came in. I think the phrase at the time was "as if punk never happened," and that was as soon after punk was like 1980, 81, 82, when bands like Spandau Ballet and Ultravox and so on were in the charts, and everybody was dressing up and wearing their mum's curtains, and the safety pin. The safety pin culture had kind of died, but we never went away. And of course, there'll always be a bogeyman to face up there, and we've got the worst one in the White House right now.
For bands like you, though, where you haven't really ever gone away, what is it? Is it hard for you to sort of keep that? I don't know if it's really anger or that that high emotional state that it creates, or do you find that the music that you write is a cathartic balance for you?
That's a very good way of putting it. And to answer it simply, yes. But also the thought of writing just for emotional entertainment, it always had to be more than that. It always had to say something, and I guess it was the music that we grew up with as well. It meant so much more to us whenever the subject matter we could identify with and know that this was putting an important message out to other people, and also showing that there is support, there is opposition to corruption and big business and oppression and worshipping the dollar, and that there are reasonable, good, right-thinking people there. It's we're never really much inspired by writing about fantasy subjects or love songs. Other people can go and do that, but that it's not inspiring, and also it's not cathartic. And I suppose the shows are very cathartic. It's difficult to. I love the energy of the shows, and it would be difficult to maintain that if the lyrics were just about boy meets girl. And like I said, other people do that and do it very well, and fair play to them. But it's really not what we would consider inspiring.
Can I talk to you also a little bit about how the music evolves for you? I hear, and I know that for Jake, that Bob Marley's a huge
influence on him. I don't know if it's so much for everyone else too, but I also hear influences of bands like the Scatolites, also maybe a little bit in the mood and lyricism of like maybe Poison Girls or Crash. Or Crass rather. I don't know if those were influences on you all, but can you talk about how sort of Caribbean island music and the ska translates into punk and sort of becomes heavier for bands, and what's that like for, you know, obviously you come from an island as well, but the Caribbean island music sort of influence on punk?
At the time when we first moved from Belfast in 1978 to London, we were staying in and around Notting Hill Gate and Ladbroke Grove in West London, which was where Rough Trade Records was based.
Right.
There was a lot of from the 50s. The area had been populated by a lot of immigrants from the Caribbean and Jamaica particularly. So we're very exposed to the music at the time, and we were really unfamiliar with that genre, but immediately drawn to it, and initially because of the beat. It has something. Maybe it's the lure of faraway, sunnier climates. Whenever you come from a dull, grey, wet, cold, rady island yourself, but that notwithstanding, it was the politics of reggae, and that we felt an affinity with, because they were singing about oppression, singing about injustice, as we were, and that's basically where what grew from. And I would say it was more the politics than anything else that attracted us to that particular genre. The genre that goes down best, no matter where you are, what the crowd is ska more than anything else. So it's kind of funny, you know, whenever you see people like dancing, and and the lyrics can be, you know, about if the lyrics could be, you know, quite really political, but it really it's just really the beat that gets everybody going. It's a great combination, you know, of lyrics that mean something, and you can dance to it.
And also, I think a really big part of your early music was sort of issues that, and you said that you would talk on this too, that the issues were particular to Ireland. Songs like Alternative Ulster, Suspect Device, Gotta Get Away, which was really, really sort of personal about something one person's going through. But as a young band, and you ventured further out into the world, did it surprise you to find how universal your themes were and how strongly people related to them, or did you get that response from them?
We were always surprised that anybody would listen to us, because we hadn't been playing. We never really thought we were very good. We hadn't been playing for very long. We had a lot of criticism from other musicians in Belfast. You know, professionals who were saying, "Oh, you're crap. You'll never get anywhere." So musically, we were surprised and pleased that other people were picking up on it, but also from a political point of view, the songs that were about Belfast particularly, and about our lives growing up. You mentioned Alternative Ulster, Suspect Device as well, about the war that was being waged around us, and it was inspiring to know that people actually, people in England cared about the situation, because it seemed like such a dead end, hopeless war that would never end, because it was so ingrained, the roots of which went back centuries. So the reaction we got from other people was as it was inspiring also, and rewarding, and it made us feel better about ourselves and where we came from, and it was and gave us hope as well that maybe there could be a better future. But you have to remember, at the time, we really never thought there would be any kind of a peace or ceasefire in our lifetime, coming from that small part of the world.
And how does it feel now? How does that does the ceasefire feel stable?
Yeah, the ceasefire's held. There's still pockets of what's been termed insurgency or dissident voices there, but the atmosphere is completely different. There were whole swathes of Belfast that were just ruined, empty, standing derelict, and there was virtually there was no entertainment at night as well. People just stayed at home. It was too dangerous to go out, and it's sometimes it's almost inconceivable to try and think of how it was, when never neighbours were being attacked and killed, and it really seemed quite hopeless at the time. But now when we go back, it's really amazing to see how economically the place has recovered. There are still, it's easy to maybe despair about entrenched attitudes over there, and lack of willingness, and the fact that so many kids are still being brought up to be biased against other kids, and that's come from their peers and principally their parents, who should know better. Sometimes it's easy to to despair about that, but we have to remember how far we have actually come. There are still, whenever there are kids there who weren't even born, because it's now past it's almost a generation ago. It's bizarre to think that they weren't even born whenever the war was being waged. So it's ridiculous that they should have any kind of bias or resentment or hatred still. But it's just one of the things that maybe we will address in another song these days.
Yeah, you mentioned that it probably had to do with their parents. What, for you and your mates, what was it that gave you that attitude? For me, I'm half Scottish and half Native American, and I was also raised by an African American household. And then I had a really diverse, like I had Chinese and Vietnamese friends, and it was really diverse. So that sort of acceptance was ingrained in me. For places that aren't that diverse, what was it that gave you that attitude that is more inclusive and sort of, the anti-fascist sort of viewpoint?
Well, actually, one of the things that was inspiring was or enlightening, I should say, was the music press. Not so much the British press, but foreign press as well. In our school library, there were French and German magazines, and we would read those, what we could understand of it, to try and find out more what was going on our own doorstep, because the British news was censored and biased, obviously, in this situation. But also, I mean, that's just the general press. But reading the music press, we were reading about all these other bands and traditions and musicians, and of course, music's worldwide, and musicians were coming, and writers and artists were from all over the world, and I just thought, this is wonderful. This is it just seemed natural to for me anyway, speaking personally, to want to embrace other cultures and other genres, and it was music that provided the vehicle for that.
Well, but I guess there's a difference between appreciation and liking music and what you all have done in taking a real stand against that sort of hatred. That there's a difference between saying, yeah, that Bob Marley's got a great beat, and
oh yeah.
And
I hear what I see what you, yeah, I mean, I see what you mean, but we were you can't really, I guess we were just curious, you can't really experience the music on a superficial level without getting to know the musicians, without getting to know the people that are behind it. Because of that, we all wanted to travel. We wanted to see the world. We wanted to go out and meet people from all over the place. We were not insular people, and we wanted to get other viewpoints and find out what people thought about us. And we felt that just to stay where we were in Belfast would not be very inspiring, and it wouldn't. You're not going to find out anything about anything just from there, from one viewpoint. And London was a great melting pot. Then went on to New York, and to Manhattan and Brooklyn, and like yourself, I had lots of different friends from different backgrounds, classes, and cultures, and that's really what, for me, provides the spice of life, the color of life, and not so black and white. There are, I've come up against entrenched attitudes in Belfast. Recently, I went back to the band's charity that we support is the Integrated Education Fund, which strives to have totally integrated schools and colleges that are not run along one religious doctrine. And because there's still less than 10% of the schools over there that are truly integrated. The state schools tend to be more Protestant, and the church-run schools are Roman Catholic. And as long as you have that division, we will still have problems. Where the system is spending millions to keep children apart, at a formative age, and then spending more millions to telling them that, when they reach 16 or 18, that, the other side's okay. And I met somebody who said that it was really against what we were trying to achieve, and he said, that's shameful. You're best off sticking to your own. And I said, well, you're the perfect example of why we are doing this. And I just can't understand. I can't fathom why anybody would not want to, why they would be so afraid or so scared of not embracing other cultures, religions, creeds, classes, whatever you want to call it. Because it's to my mind, it's just part of an enlightenment process. It's part of growing. It's a natural progression to want to find out about these things, because at the end of the day, life is nothing more than what you've learned. It's nothing more than electrical currents that react to emotions, and this, to my mind, was it just seemed to be the right thing to do, to try and find out about other people, how they lived their lives, what they thought, and so on.
That's a fantastic answer.
Oh, thanks.
Okay, so let me ask you about the record industry in general. Is it really still an industry anymore, or has the internet become a way for dream distribution? Like we started out with Rough Trade and the Cartel. Crass Records sort of did this too earlier on, but ultimately failed because it was too expensive or too hard to run that kind of a system. Has the internet opened that up and changed that for the good, and do you think permanently? And if so, the way that you raised funds for the last album through Pledge Music, does that make you feel more responsible for what you're writing than it did previously? Sort of a two-part question there.
The internet has made, in one sense, it's fantastic because it's enabled us to access many musicians and artists, singers, and so on that wouldn't otherwise we wouldn't otherwise have heard. And in terms of that distribution, it's great. And there's so many other bands that I've heard about that I knew would have been difficult to reach. And I can remember my memories, go as far back as not being able to get my favorite Stooges record or whatever in the local record store. I would have to send off for the vinyl, and wait a week for it to come, and desperately searching, through classified ads in the back of the local music press to try and find these things. And now we've got so many artists at our fingertips that you can access. So that's gone throughout almost like two generations of music access. I mean that's the good side. Unfortunately, whenever people expect to get music for nothing, and the streaming companies now like SoundCloud, etc., are paying such infinitesimally small royalties that it's got a lot more difficult to make a living, and it's almost impossible now from record sales. We find ourselves touring we find ourselves touring not to support record sales, but releasing records to support tours, because it's the only income that we have, because the record sales have dropped so drastically. For example, the studio album No Going Back that you mentioned earlier, got to number one in the UK. The sales were less than 5,000 to get it there. It was in the number one UK rock charts.
Really?
I remember in 1980 we got a top 20 single. I think it got to like number 15 in the UK. To get there, it had to sell I think about 150,000 copies. So that just gives you an idea of how sales have cataclysmically crashed, plus all the record companies that have gone out of business. A few of the smarter ones have embraced the internet instead of trying to fight it, which the record industry tried to do. Like they tried to fight digital audio tape players, DAT players, like they tried to fight cassette. The slogan of the day used to be "Home taping is killing music."
Wow.
And they would turn a picture of a cassette into a skull and crossbones. That was what you used to get on the inside of record sleeves, on the in the inner sleeve, in the dust jacket. They would have that stamped. So they've never been an industry to deal with new technology. They really just tended to fight that instead, and that was their undoing, because they couldn't stop the digital age. and the access that the internet gave to people, and also, but it was more the mindset that, oh, why should we buy music anymore? CD sales crashed, then downloads crashed as well, and most people are just streaming music at the moment. Personally, I'm not too keen on the quality of the streaming music, although I do subscribe to Spotify simply because I think it's giving something back to the to musicians as well, even though I know that a tiny fraction will actually get to anyone.
Yeah.
So what was the second part of your question?
Well, if you feel more responsible because you're being paid directly by the fans through Pledge Music, then does it feel like there's an onus on you that you wouldn't have had before?
Yes, it's a very good point of mentioning the Pledge, because without the ability to use the internet to reach fans like that, we wouldn't have been able to afford to record the last couple of albums, and the recent live DVD was recorded in Glasgow.
The Best Served Loud DVD.
And it's called Best Served Loud.
Yeah.
And it's the 25th anniversary.
Right.
Of the band doing St. Patrick's Day. But anyway, we were very humbled by the response, and we knew we had a good fan base, but I really thought it might have been a struggle to get there. But thankfully, it enabled us to make the album that we wanted to make instead of the album that we had to make, and that was the big difference. So yeah, the internet is it's enabled that aspect. I'm glad you mentioned that, because I'd overlooked that. I was just thinking of other bands that I've been able to access because of the freedom that the internet gave me.
Yeah, that was really something, right? I think I read that you reached the goal for that in 12 hours.
Oh, it was incredible. Yeah, I forget what the time span actually was, but it was definitely less than 24 hours. Yeah, and
that must have generated a lot of excitement for you all just going into the studio, just like I mean, way to feel the love, right?
Well, it was a long time since. Well, personally, it was a long time since I'd recorded, because this is the first studio album the band had done since I returned 10 years ago. So that was good. I hadn't recorded since years ago when I was working with Moby, going from punk to funk, from punk to techno, rather.
Right.
It was quite a departure. But yes, we were very excited about that.
How was that? How did working with Moby inform what you're doing now, or do you feel like that standing behind the scenes, managing someone else, managing their tour and stuff like that, behind the scenes of what's going on, did that inform what you do for your own self?
Absolutely. With Moby, I was the equivalent of the player manager, where I started out managing his tours. Then I was dragged on stage for an encore for a bit of fun, and it went really well. So then I was doing all the shows after that, as well as tour managing. So it was a genuine 360-degree operation, and a lot of this was before he got really famous. But it was playing-wise was a lot of fun, because he was playing rock as well as techno and metal as well. He had he brought out an album called Animal Rights that was all metal. But from a management point of view, yes, everything that I learnt then about, particularly the financial side, stood the band in good stead to make sure that the operation was being run well, and that there weren't any problems. Because if you're worried about if the bills are going to get paid, or if we're going to get paid, etc., then you can't concentrate on the things that are important. You know, on just concentrating on playing great shows and making great music. So I was able to help run that, and we have management now, but every so often I jump in and help out. I can't help it.
So the last thing I'll ask you, with the official part of the interview here is tell me how much you love. I'm a bass player too. That's what I grew up on. But tell me how much you love playing the bass line for Full Steam Backwards. That bass line just like kicks you in the ass from the first second of the song all the way through the end, and sort of drives that song.
Oh, that's very kind of you. Thanks. It was, I don't know if you heard the demo version, but when we first went into the studio, and Jake wrote the song, of course, and like so many of his songs, he would very often start with a guitar riff whenever it was being demoed, and then the band would come in. But I remember thinking that there are quite a lot that start with the guitar riff.
Right.
So I deconstructed the guitar intro, and rather than I think it was a D flat minor to go into A, and rather than start on the root note, I started as low as I could on the 4th string, took it down to an E, to the 3rd, and that seemed to really work. And I was trying to make it sound, the song's called Full Steam Backwards, and I was trying to make it sound like a train running a runaway train, and Steve on drums obliged accordingly with the drum part, and it really worked. It was a nice example of a band working together, working things out in a studio, in a rehearsal studio, as you go along, and changing the character of the song and making it better in the process. So I'm glad you appreciated that.
Cool. Hey, Ali, thank you so much for being on the B-side. We really, really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for the chat. It's nice talking to you. You sound like a very nice gentleman. And the website's fantastic. I was enjoying checking it out and all the clips that you've got on there. And very high quality too. Yeah, I was very impressed with that.
Well, thank you very much.
Okay, everybody, that's the show. Thank you for watching the B-side. Remember, keep an eye out for our GoFundMe campaign, and we'll talk to you soon. Peace out.
So you studied hard and you got a good job, but you don't want to be just another slob, and you put some money away for a rainy day. And the job goes well and you like the work, and you think promotion is a cert, and you never see it ending any day. Then you get a nice car and you get a nice wife, and you think to yourself, man, it's a wonderful life, but you don't see the trouble heading right your way on the financial page. Put your money in a bank someday, I'll say. You couldn't see the bastards